Welcome back to the Relaxing Ghost channel here on YouTube. As always, your host with the most, Ghost. Today we got the Royal Rumble 2008 review, and this was a request from Dan Curley. So thank you very much, Dan. Keep sending in those suggestions, guys. If you want to see any other Royal Rumbles reviewed, I do have a few left in the can that I'll probably end up reviewing, like the 95 and 96 Rumbles, and maybe a few others. So the 2008 Royal Rumble. It's a pretty cool event to go back and watch every now and again. This was live from Madison Square Garden. And what a time. This would be the final Rumble before WWE went PG. And this is the first WWE pay-per-view in HD. So really cool. WWE was upgrading their game in the late 2000s. So there's only 5 matches on here. And this pay-per-view actually seems to flow fairly nice. They started out with a career-threatening match. The Nature Boy Ric Flair versus MVP. And, everyone wanted to test Ric Flair on his way out. MVP, a former U.S. champion, former tag team champion. He put Flair through the ringer here. Eventually, Ric Flair wins with the figure 4 leg lock. And I believe Ric Flair actually hit the crossbody off the top throughout the match, which Ric Flair rarely did in his career. Rick, of course, would win the match, and, his career would stay intact. But this is the kind of the beginning of, Mr. McMahon saying, okay, you want to keep your career, but the next time you lose, you're done. And that would remain true until WrestleMania. This was a hot New York crowd. I always love the Garden shows. And this would be the first Madison Square Garden show, I believe, since WrestleMania 20. So they hadn't been to the Garden in about 4 years. And this is really the era where they're kind of slowing those things down. After this, I believe Survivor Series in 2011 is kind of the last Garden pay-per-view. I love the small aisle way with the, the kind of HD doors now in this era. I always love that little look with the camera, the way the ring looks, and the whole shot of the crowd there. Just a amazing feeling at Madison Square Garden. And then we go on to Chris Jericho versus JBL. JBL recently returned to the ring after, I believe, a serious back injury in 2006 or so. So JBL had been on the shelf for a while. I never could really get into his second run here. And I believe shortly after this, he had that kind of thing with Shawn Michaels where he bought Shawn. The match doesn't go too long. Jericho gets busted open fairly early on, and then Jericho just kind of loses his cool, bashes JBL over the head with a steel chair, and then, he's choking him with the wires at ringside, and Jericho is DQ'd, so kind of a throwaway match here. And then we get into our two championship matches for the World Heavyweight title and the WWE title. We got Edge versus Rey Mysterio. I feel like we've seen this match a few times during the PG era or the late Ruthless Aggression era. But Edge was such a great heel throughout this period of time. Vicky Guerrero is now the GM, and she's kind of provoking Rey Mysterio. Edge does retain the title after a beautiful spear. Rey Mysterio's going for a kind of that springboard, whether it was the splash or whatever, the West Coast pop. Edge hits a spear out of that and retains the championship. This is my favorite version of Edge, the ruthless heel, kind of ultimate opportunist. Ultimate opportunist, if you will. Then we get into Jeff Hardy, the Intercontinental Champion, versus Randy Orton, the WWE Champion. And Jeff Hardy, I believe, won a number one contenders match at Armageddon the previous month. So, Jeff Hardy, the IC champion. I believe he was still the IC champion the month prior. So, they've been pushing Hardy pretty consistently in this time. And, him challenging Orton, this was a great match. I believe he hit the Swanton off the stage around this time as well. The Raw set before they changed it to the HD sets. Or it might have been the year after or whatever. But, I thought this was a cool matchup, a champion versus champion kind of deal. Orton retains after a beautiful RKO. It seemed like Hardy almost had this match won. He hits a Swanton, he goes for the Twist of Fate, Orton counters it into the RKO for the 1-2-3. And this was the age of Orton. Again, probably my favorite version of Randy Orton. I always thought Orton was well-deserved of a championship reign in this era. And then the main event would be the 2008 Royal Rumble match. This was the 21st annual Royal Rumble match. 30 men, one winner. And this is a pretty crazy kind of New York style subway kind of deal here. Yeah, we got a spoiler cover, but I think this is actually a pretty underrated Rumble. So the previous year, 2007, we had that great ending with Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. This year, those two men are starting the match at 1 and 2. And The Undertaker, I believe, entered 1, Shawn 2. So I always thought that was a cool concept. They never really followed through with that because, in pretty much every year, guys are either given the number 1 spot or they want to enter number 1. And if he's number 1, I'm going to be number 2 is kind of how things go if, the babyface and the heel are going at it. And kind of like the year prior, Shawn and Taker kind of start this thing off the right way. And they're going at him blow by blow very early on. They don't really last that long. They last about a good half of this match. Triple H would have the most eliminations in this Rumble with 6. And he was the odds-on favorite going into this thing. Of course, I believe it was... Yeah, he missed WrestleMania 23. So Triple H had his big comeback at SummerSlam. And Triple H is a big babyface by this point, believe it or not. And Triple H is over in the Garden. We got only 2 legends returning in this Rumble, which was Jimmy Superfly Snuka and Rowdy Roddy Piper. I thought that was a great moment there with Piper and Snuka getting it on one more time in the Garden. So not too many legends were in these Rumbles in this era. We did have somewhat of a mixture of ECW, Raw, and SmackDown, but it was mostly Raw, who I believe had about half the field here, and then the other half was a mix between SmackDown, ECW. So John Cena surprises the world, entering at number 30, and he's gonna win the match. He gets an amazing pop here. This is pretty incredible to go back and watch, because he got injured at right before No Mercy in 2007. The fans were so sick of Cena by that point. He'd been on top for over 2 years. He'd beaten everyone. He'd done everything, and he torn his pectoral. They didn't think he'd be back at 2 months later, 3 months later. So this is pretty crazy. John Cena's back, and he wins the Rumble. So for the second straight year, the number 30 spot wins the Rumble match. It's pretty cool that Taker and Cena winning, back-to-back Rumbles at the number 30 spot. Overall, I'd say this is a pretty good Rumble event. I'm going to give this a solid 8 out of 10. It may not be the best Rumble, but it's certainly worth going back and watching. Let me know your thoughts, guys. If you have any suggestions, comment down below. Share your favorite moments of Royal Rumble 2008. We'll talk to you later. Peace.